Welcome to Adventures in Solitaire. Today we'll be reviewing D100 Dungeon. So as mentioned in the intro, today we'll be discussing D100 Dungeon. So what is D100 Dungeon? D100 Dungeon is an adventure game by MK Games that simulates some aspects of pen and paper role-playing games. More specifically, it addresses the dungeon delving aspects. It might also help to take an excerpt from the book itself. So we'll go ahead and flip to the back here. D100 Dungeon is a game in which you will steer an adventurer through underground caves and dungeons, looking for lost treasures and completing dangerous quests. With each game, your adventurer will gain in wealth, recognition, and become stronger and more skillful in their pursuits. All you need to play D100 Dungeon is a pencil, eraser, a few dice, and your imagination. Can you beat the dungeon? In D100 Dungeon, you will build a single character from scratch and send them on their way into various dungeons of increasing difficulty, though the concept is stretched, in a good way, with later content. Various supplements for the game, much like 4 Against Darkness, will greatly expand what is available and can help bring it closer to that pen and paper RPG experience that many strive for. I will likely be referring to 4 Against Darkness to one extent or another, as both D100 Dungeon and 4 Against Darkness are popular competitors. So I think that we should probably start where most good adventure RPGs start, with character creation. With that being said, let's talk about our character's attributes, race, and skills. When you first open the book, it will almost immediately guide you through character creation. You will start with choosing your attributes, and it's important to note that this is, as the book's name suggests, a D100 system. So in effect, in some ways, a percentile system. So if you have 40 in an attribute, you will succeed about 40% of the time when using that attribute. Physics allowing, of course. The attributes are used both in and out of combat. There are ways to boost the attribute rolls, and we'll discuss that shortly. You get 3 values to assign to your starting character's attribute: 30, 40, and 50. You will get to modify these positively and negatively in the next couple of steps in character creation. Their primary attributes are strength, dexterity, and intelligence. You will use strength for melee weapons and in actions that we would normally attribute strength to, like bashing a door in or lifting something heavy, for example. You have probably already surmised that if strength is used for melee, then dexterity must be used for range combat, and you would be correct in that assessment. Dexterity is also used for things that require you to be nimble, such as escaping combat or dealing with traps or locks, among other things. Intelligence is the primary attribute for using magic, and is also used to avoid things that would affect a character's psyche. Once you have your character's attribute value selected, you can move on to choosing a race. The core book offers 3 races to choose from. Each race will alter 2 of your primary attributes, for better or for worse. They will also gift you with a free skill. So what are these skills? Skills are used in very specific situations. They are used in and out of combat and add to your attribute value when making rolls for those various situations. Once you have your race selected, you will get to pick 2 additional skills, aside from the one you got during race selection. Again, these must be skills that you did not get from your race selection. By the time that you are done, you will have your 3 primary attributes, a race, and 3 skills for your character. This will make up the core of who your character is for now. Later supplements can take this much further. After you have your core character made, you will move on to random kit selection and some static gear like oil for your lamp and lockpicks, etc. You'll also be assigned a beginner quest to help you get your feet wet. The last steps of character creation will have you set your default health, life, and fate levels. Health is the amount of damage you can take before your character gives up the ghost, and fate allows you to re-roll on any die roll. This is very handy. We will talk about life a little later in the review. So what about experiencing character levels? Well, D100 Dungeon does not use a traditional leveling system. You won't ever tell anyone that you have a level 3 character. You will instead discuss their stats, wealth, or equipment. You might even talk about major enemies that you have vanquished or hard quests that you have finished. D100 Dungeon uses a use it to gain it mentality. This is something that I really like in my RPG systems. The idea of getting a lockpicking skill increase when I have never lockpicked in my life never made any sense to me. Whenever you roll a 10 or less on a D100 roll using an attribute or skill, You get to mark pips off of your character sheet. When the pips have been filled, you gain ranks in that attribute or skill. There is more detail than I list here, but this is the basic system that it uses. To be clear here, this happens when you succeed or fail in a task using an attribute or skill. I love the failure still means success mechanic, as it is how we all learn. Most of our learning in life is not learned by successes, but rather by failure, and this system incorporates that. I love it. D100 Dungeon uses a roll and write system like many other solo systems. Its main strength lies in its random encounters and thematic room options. Some of these will require skill or attribute use to successfully pass or gain some benefit. These range from simple traps or locks all the way up to underground rivers and treasure troves. There are also different types of rooms which are more likely to generate certain table results. This allows for dungeons to be very thematic and varied compared to other systems. I would say that, especially due to the skill usage, the D100 Dungeon has an advantage over the core set of 4 Against Darkness, for example. D100 Dungeon also has a push your luck mechanic in the way of supplies and an ever-dwindling fuel source for your lantern. Holy Hannah help you if you run out of oil. I personally have not had that happen though. The loot tables are also awesome. D100 Dungeon allows for special random rare equipment, similar to the way that we're used to random loot from games like Diablo. It has a similar system to the prefixes and suffixes system, for example. You will be rolling a room at a time, and with the oil mechanic, you'll always have that time at your back. Speaking of time, D100 Dungeon has a time track that starts and resets after so many turns. As you progress through the time track, you'll hit milestones that will force the use of various character resources. In addition, the further down the track you go, the more likely it is that you will encounter an enemy. Keep in mind that you can also encounter enemies in some of the room types by default. Dungeons are definitely not meant for long-term character exposure. Get in, get the loot, get the objective, and get out. So what does combat look like? Well, before we dive into combat, and I know I just said what does combat look like, I want to go back to experience again. There is a sheet, separate from your main character sheet, where you will track encounters. When you successfully defeat an enemy, you will add that enemy to this encounter sheet. There are certain points on the sheet where you will gain things like gold, attributes, skills, etc. When the sheet is full, you will either erase all of the encounters or use a new sheet and start again. This is a wonderful feature that I'm glad was added in. Okay, enough of that. Let's talk about how combat works. Unless some special ability or rule would declare otherwise, combat is done in a you attack, they always attack fashion. So it's not a system where you get to act first and kill the enemy before they can deal a blow. Combat is absolutely simultaneous, and at the beginning of every round, you will roll to see what the enemy is going to do. Will they try to escape? Will they go into a sort of rage because they have taken enough damage? Or will they simply attack normally, which is typical? There are no range bands or character enemy positioning to worry about here. Once you have determined the enemy's action, you will have to decide what action you will take with your character. Typically, this will end up being a simple attack or use of a potion or spell, if you have one to use. Though it might be that you want to block the monster from escaping, or that you might want to attempt to escape yourself. On the note of item use, you do have to choose to use a spell, item, or attack. You cannot do both on the same turn. When you attack, you will need to see if you hit the enemy. If you're using a melee weapon, you will roll against your strength. If you are using a ranged weapon, you will roll against your dexterity. If you roll at or below your attribute rating, then you have successfully hit the enemy. Once you have determined that you have hit the enemy, if you did not, then the round passes to the enemy. Then you will need to see where you hit the enemy, as well as how much damage you have caused. This will take the form of rolling 2 dice, a d6 for damage and a d10 for location. The location can heavily modify the damage dealt. In addition, your weapon will also have an impact here. Once you have hit the enemy and dealt damage to your target, or missed the target, then the turn will pass to the enemy. Each enemy will have its own attack value and will need to meet or roll under that value to hit your character. They also use the same mechanics to deal damage to your character that you use when you attack them. Enemies will often have special abilities or traits that help them in combat. In some instances, it may actually help you as well. Some enemies fight in groups and start out strong, but will weaken as their numbers are diminished by your attacks. Combat rounds will continue until you or the enemy are defeated or have escaped. There are a couple of extra cool features for combat as well in regards to damage and mitigating that damage. Your equipment can be damaged, and you will use various pieces of armor to help negate damage that you might take. There are a total of 13 different equipment locations in your character. I remember seeing this for the first time and almost letting out an audible sigh as I realized that all or most of my equipment fantasies had just been met. When your character eventually takes damage from an enemy's attack, you will have a choice. You can let that damage go through as normal, or you can see where the enemy has hit you. Now, if they hit your arm, for example, and you happen to have armor there, you can deflect up to 2 points of damage with that piece of armor. You do have to be careful though, as each point of damage does 1 point or pip of damage to the armor that you use to deflect that damage. This is damage that you will have to pay to have repaired. It is also possible to have the armor completely destroyed due to its condition. You would then have to remove it from your character sheet as it would serve no further function in the game. You cannot sell it for scraps, for example. Additionally, some armor comes with defense bonus ratings. If the enemy rolls their damage dice and it is equal to or less than your character's overall defense value, then you can reduce that damage by your defense value. Your defense value can never exceed a total of 5 points, so you will never be able to reduce damage done when the enemy rolls a natural 6 on the dice. It is also important to note that the die roll is the base damage that a monster is doing. So even if they roll a 1 on the die, it may have additional damage added that will also need to be negated. Your character will then take any excess damage. In addition, there are times in combat when a monster can hit your belt and destroy valuable equipment. So this makes storing some things in your backpack worthwhile. You might want to save something for a larger encounter, for example. Combat in D100 Dungeon finds a fairly happy medium between complexity and simplicity. It's not as simple as most interactive fiction books, but it's definitely not as complex as a full-fledged RPG. This is a good thing given the amount of combat you will experience in the dungeon. There are times where I want something closer to a board game feel, and there are times when I want to explore and see what I can defeat quickly, where I want to see in quick succession what my new armor or weapon can do. As a comparison to 4 Against Darkness, this system adds a little bit more meat to combat, but not enough to feel cumbersome. There's an absolutely huge variety of enemies to fight in this system. I always get excited and honestly a little scared about what new enemy that I might encounter. Some of the enemies definitely make me think twice about not skilling for the escape skill. Additionally, supplements will add some additional features to combat that might be worth looking into. This includes new combat mechanics to entirely new types of character builds. Think alchemy or blacksmithing, scavenging, or even beast mastery. So let's talk about magic. All attributes have a special ability that you can unlock once your attribute reaches 50 or above. This will have an effect on magic as you cannot cast any magic if you do not have an attribute score of 50 or more. In addition, you do not start with any spells at character creation, so magicians, wizards, etc. are not an option at the start of character creation. That is, at least if you're concerned with casting a spell right away. So they're not an option, at least in the traditional sense. So if you want to have a magician, you'll likely need to balance your character so that you can survive ranged or melee combat and slowly build your intelligence attribute over time. It is possible for you to have a 50 intelligence score or more at the start of the game and do your best with around 40 in dexterity or strength, but you will be a little closer to the wall with your rolls in combat as you wait for your first few magic spells. You are allowed to write spells in your spell book before you cast them, so this is helpful. You could also make any number of semi-balanced house rules, such as maybe taking a -5 to an attribute to roll on the magic table for every spell, maybe up to a maximum of 3, during character creation. I have a feeling, though, that magic was kept this way to help balance things out in the early games, so it might be important to keep that in mind. In addition, most spells will damage your health, and when they don't damage your health, they will damage your strength instead. This makes spells very draining. It is definitely a huge choice to cast most spells. As long as you've not made magic your focus from the start, you can edge your way into becoming a magic user and use magic as needed. Having said that, I might also add that the D100 supplement, The Lost Tomb of Extraordinary Rules, drastically changes what it means to be a magic user. It also helps change the cost of magic as well, making it so that you're not always going to be suffering health or strength damage. I really can't recommend the supplement more if you're a fan of magic. It also includes a magic guild, schools of magic, as well as a great myriad of other fun and useful gameplay additions. The Lost Tomb of Extraordinary Rules is my mage book, although it does cover other rule additions worth mentioning as well. But that's best saved for a more in-depth review for this. I did mention while speaking about magic that all attributes have a special ability that you can unlock once an attribute reaches 50 or more. Strength gets Mighty Blow, which allows for exploding damage dice, and Dexterity gets Perfect Aim, which allows you to re-roll the 10-sided damage location dice when you attack, which is also very nice. So what about character death? How is that managed? Well, when your character's HP or health reaches 0, then your character may well have died. The game does have a mechanism to help with this, as D100 Dungeon can be punishing at times. Though I have yet to watch a character die prematurely, I guess I can thank RNG a bit for that. When you die, you can reduce your life score by 1 to regain all health and negate all negative status effects immediately. You begin the game with 3 life, and there are a few ways that you can get more. You can get life by advancing the combat tracker, for example, that we talked about earlier. So death is not so final, thankfully. Alright, and on that topic of ways to gain more life, or more life points, let's talk a little bit about potions and how they can help to scale the difficulty a bit here. Like most role-playing games, or dungeon delves, D100 Dungeon has more than its fair share of potions and concoctions. You will not be left wanting for any of these. There are a few beyond standard health dots that are worth mentioning. Fate potions are of particular note is there are different types. So you can have a fate potion that gives you additional points of fate for your rerolls. This is very valuable. But maybe even more interesting are fate potions like Greater Fate Potion. The Greater Fate Potion will give you a plus 60 on a table roll. Plus 60. Because D100 Dungeon tends to stack the best at the higher end of a die roll for tables, this means that you will automatically be on the better end of any table no matter what when you roll a D100 roll. So if you're starting at 60 and you roll a low at 20, well, you're at an 80. It's really hard to go wrong once you roll. So if you want a really nice, really rare piece of armor, it'd be really nice to have one of those around. It's not a guarantee, but it helps. Life potions will give you additional life points in case your character meets an untimely demise. There are far too many potions to mention here. Add to that character expansions will even allow you to brew your own concoctions. We should also probably touch a little bit on record keeping. D100 Dungeon requires a reasonable amount of record keeping. I would say that it's not that bad for just the core book. If you happen to have all of the core gameplay supplements as I do, then this changes a bit. I went from 3 to 4 sheets to keep track of my character and their progress to around a dozen. Having that number may make you freeze, but I want to make an argument here. I know there are solo role players out there that are all too familiar with record keeping. My records for solo games are vast, so this is really just a streamlined way of repeating what I already do in my solo role-playing sessions. I can also say that because of the mechanical and step-oriented process, it can almost be a cathartic process, making changes as I go and seeing the world change through the various records. Sometimes I even envision being a record keeper of my hero's story and progress, depending on what I'm recording. As long as I'm not in that place of feeling like I'm hurried up, it can actually end up being a very calming experience instead of what might be seen as something more akin to an endeavor. I honestly see the record keeping much of the time as part of the gameplay, but your mileage here may be different, as some of us enjoy this process more than others. It may also depend on your mood, of course. Let's talk about RNG. I think another potential concern that may be here is the RNG swing factor. D100 Dungeon does have mechanics that will help with this. It also has potions and other effects that can change the RNG, especially when we're talking about fate potions and life potions or points. But this is really true for almost any system when we're talking about drawing cards or dice for random effect. The D100 is a large swing indeed, but so too can it be a D2 with a hit or a miss roll. At the end of the day, it felt balanced. I would have hard, harsh moments and moments of general calm, if you can have that in a dark dungeon, and moments of incredible, overwhelming success. I would like to talk a little bit about free content. If you have been on the edge of purchasing D100 Dungeon, there is a free version provided by MK Games. This is more than playable. So what does this free version look like, and how does it compare to the full version? Well, I think it's probably best to take note from the author himself here. So with that said, let's take a look at what he says. Alright, so according to MK Games, D100 Dungeon was originally designed and developed as a print and play, downloadable game. It has since grown into a new and updated version with a wealth of resources. A campaign and an adventure book has also been introduced, along with tons of new rules that will make your games even more fun and enjoyable. I agree with that. All of this material, new material, is being released for the print-on-demand game, often referred to as version 3 or V3, and it will not integrate very well or at all with the free print and play game, which is being offered as an introductory version to the game. Therefore, in order to take advantage of the new and future material, you will need to update to the print-on-demand version of the game, available on DriveThruRPG. Below are some details and main points of interest of what the version 3 has to offer over the print and play game. There is color artwork throughout. The print and play game only had black and white images inside the book. Adventurers are given a race such as human, elf, and dwarf. This is not a feature of the print and play game. The adventurer will gain more experience in areas linked to their race. In some of the version 3 expansions, more races are added. The adventurers will also follow a hero path such as warrior, rogue, or sorcerer. This is not a feature of the print and play game. The adventurer will gain more experience in areas linked to their hero path. In some of the version 3 expansions, more hero paths are also added. So I think it's worth mentioning, and I didn't bring this up earlier, it's something that I'd missed, is that you do, as part of your character creation, get to choose a hero path. Warrior, rogue, and sorcerer, as I just mentioned there. And they'll increase some of your attributes and decrease others of your attributes there. They'll also give a couple of skill bonuses as well. So you go from 3 to potentially 5 skills that you can have there. So that's very nice. So there's also a lot of rules clarifications and editing that's been done to bring the latest version, that being version 3, in line with its new publication. The game mechanics have been improved considerably, such as defense value for armor has been changed to an armor value, and the defense bonus has been changed to a defense value. And quest objectives have been updated. The adventure sheets and dungeon sheets have been updated to allow for the alteration and changes made to the rules. And the tables have been reworked and updated. This rework has increased the rules section from 4 to 16 pages to 4 to 28, and the entire book has grown from 53 pages to 75 pages. So what about additional content once you have the full version, the version 3 that's out for on RPG Geek? Well, D100 Dungeon currently has a total of 5 supplement books. It also has a variety of additional content, like the ability to turn a D100 Dungeon into more of a board game-like experience. I currently own the Lost Tome of Extraordinary Rules, the Adventurer's Companion, and the World Builder supplements. Between these, D100 Dungeon is one of my favorite dungeon delving experiences in my library. It is hard for me to say which supplement I value the most, but I would likely lean towards the World Builder supplement, as it allows for overworld hex crawl elements. This takes into account area-based encounters, mounts, hunger, crime, etc. It really opened the game up for me, but that's probably a review best done for another day. I think that if you're going to get into the game, then these supplements are almost a necessary addition for me. That's not to say that it's not fun on its own, but these books really open up the game world and the game system quite a bit, much like in the same way that 4 Against Darkness is opened up with all of its supplements. Collector's editions of D100 Dungeon were recently released, and it looks absolutely amazing. I would have to fight back jealousy for anyone who already has a copy. They look beautiful. Oh, And I also forgot to mention one of the most unique editions that's offered through MK Games. D100 Dungeon has what I would personally call a board game conversion kit of sorts. Although I do not own this for review, it has been on my radar for some time. This is the D100 Dungeon mapping game. It's an add-on for D100 Dungeon that converts some of the book to actual physical components. Reading from an excerpt from the MK Games site, the mapping game combines a rule book with cards and tokens to give the player a board game feel. It includes 96 mapping cards, 24 map overlays, 53 monster cards, and 150 tokens. Now, when you are required to roll on table M for mapping, you will instead draw cards to determine the areas you discover. Doors, monsters, and geographical features are generated from token pools. By using the mapping game, you will create the dungeon in front of you instead of drawing it on the dungeon sheet. I'm sure some of you are likely already eyeing the mapping cards as I did, as these are very useful even outside of D100 Dungeon. It looks like a pretty cool kit. This is available for do-it-yourself print and as a physical purchase. You can visit the MK Games site to get a feel for additional content that I've not mentioned here, and there's definitely healthy support for the product there. I think it's also worth mentioning that there is a very healthy community on Board Game Geek. You will find various additions such as alternate character sheets, perpetual dungeon mods, game trackers, cheat sheets, etc. There's also a decent clip of gameplay variant conversations in the forums. You might take a look if you have the time. So I also wanted to take just a moment to talk about upcoming content. So I reached out to Martin Knight at MK Games and asked about what the near future holds for the series, among other questions. He was gracious enough to give some insight to that question. He advised that there is additional content planned for D100 Dungeon. He mentioned that there are 2 more campaign books planned, in addition 5 more adventure books. Work is currently underway for the second adventure book, and it is currently due to be released towards the end of the year. He advised that there could be additional gameplay rules added to some of these additional works as well. These could, of course, be used for other D100 games. So if you are a fan or interested in the future of D100 series as a whole, this is definitely good news. Alright, so closing thoughts. I love most of the game systems in my library, and D100 Dungeon is no exception. D100 Dungeon is a dungeon delving to a T. If you had never heard of pen and paper dungeon delves and you saw this on a local shop's bookshelf, you would likely be well more than satisfied with what you just found and purchased. I am reminded of the time as a teen and wanting so very much for a way to fight my way through dungeons, finding rare treasures and growing in strength and power. As a teen, that day never came. I looked at D100 Dungeon and wished I could step back to the door of time and had even just the core book to my younger self. I know it would have cemented memories that I would never forget. Of course, today we have an extraordinary amount of options to choose from. We are living in that place I dreamed of so many years ago. While we are comparing, because of the numerous options for dungeon delves, I'm going to stick with the pen and paper variety where I prefer to live. I do enjoy board game delves from time to time, but the time on table, the time to set up, time to put away, can often mean those games are sitting on the shelf more than I would like. In the realm of pen and paper, we really have the 2 main popular heavyweights to choose from. So that's D100 Dungeon and 4 Against Darkness. And I'm not adding systems here that have yet to hit retail or to see completion. There are other systems, but to my knowledge, most of them are not as verbose as these 2 systems, especially when you consider the supplements. Both of these delves can change dramatically with the use of supplements. This is the point where it almost stops being about which one has better mechanics, and it becomes more about personal choice. I, personally, enjoy both systems, and want both in my library for certain moods. D100 Dungeon fulfills that Diablo-esque roguelike feel. Diablo is based on NetHack, after all, if I remember right. While 4 Against Darkness feels more like an old-school board game, with tons of options after the supplements have been added. D100 Dungeon is no different here when we're speaking of options. D100 Dungeon is also more dark and gritty. This is actually my preference for fantasy. I don't know if I would say full-on gothic theme is a personal choice, but it's definitely close, if not gothic. There is not much in the way of silliness here. The world is dark and dangerous, just as I like it. Every room is a new chance to find something miraculous and character-changing. It is a habit-forming guilty pleasure as you wait to see what you can discover next. The amount of equipment options here are staggering, to say the least. I don't even want to touch on the fact that you can even make investments in local markets as a side game to take a chance at earning much desired gold. Later expansions even allow you to own property. Think of everything from a small room rental all the way up to owning your own castle. Yeah, castles. This does not even touch options such as the World Builder supplement, where I can live out my overland fantasies as I travel vast lands, solving mysteries and helping local villages, all while growing in renown, or dare I say infamy. If you have not played D100 Dungeon before and already have a dungeon delve in your home, would still recommend this for purchase. It's a unique experience and one that I have to struggle with keeping on my shelf instead of in my hands where it deserves to be. Like I've said before, and will likely say again, it has a home on my shelf right next to my desk where it will stay. So, as always, if you've listened all the way through or not, thank you so very much. I look forward to seeing you again soon.